What are some facts that are actually false? It's believed that camels store water in their humps. The ability for camels to survive for 7 days without water isn't due to the fact that they store water in their humps. All their humps are fat, but the fat is what provides them with about 3 weeks of energy. Camels' kidneys and intestines are really the ones that retain water. Einstein didn't fail math. People in the Middle Ages thought the Earth was flat. The Greeks had already calculated the radius of the sphere with great precision centuries before. Edit spelling. There is no 24 hours waiting period on a missing persons report. If someone is missing, even if it's for just an hour, you can most certainly file a report. Edit. My most upvoted comment ever is potentially life-saving. Cool. I have myself been told by police about this waiting period. If you ever have to file a report and they tell you that, just insist. It can be intimidating, but I'm willing to guess 90% of the time people are told that is because the cop or cops are just lazy. As many people have said, time is absolutely crucial in cases like this. The myth that Titanic was in any way badly designed, badly built, or badly operated by the standards of the time. In fact, there are so many ridiculous inaccuracies surrounding Titanic that it's hard to list even a fraction of them here. She was an incredibly seaworthy ship, much more so than any passenger ship around today. The iceberg tore a gash almost a third of the way down her side, and she still stayed afloat for more than 2 hours. In that time, all but 2 of her lifeboats were launched. There wasn't time to launch anymore. She could have had 100 more lifeboats on board, but that wouldn't have helped without vastly more crew to operate them. Titanic's passengers genuinely did believe that she was practically unsinkable. When the time came to begin loading the lifeboats, many thought they would be safer staying on Titanic. There wasn't time for the crew to wait around convincing more people to get in. So when a lifeboat was ready, if there was no one else waiting to get in, it had to go. This is why so many of Titanic's lifeboats left only half full. The crew weren't worried about overfilling them. Titanic wasn't traveling too fast for the conditions, by the standards of practice around at the time. Further precautions were put into practice after the incident, but no one on board can be blamed for doing what anyone on any ship would have done the same. Titanic was by no means a fast ship, nor was she ever intended to be. The White Star Line, Titanic's owners, were in competition with one other big shipping line, Cunard. Cunard's liners, Mauretania, Lusitania and later Aquitania, were the fastest in the business. To combat this, instead of fighting for speed, White Star decided to try to make their liners the most luxurious in the world. Olympic and Titanic were famed for their splendor and comfort. Passengers said that it was easy to forget that you were at sea, as there were very few vibrations from the engines, and the ships remained stable even in fairly rough seas. By comparison, Cunard's liners were very fast, but their quadruple screw configuration made vibration more apparent. It's a myth that Titanic was ever trying to make record-breaking speed across the Atlantic. She wasn't built using substandard materials. This rumor goes around a lot these days because of an article that was written some time ago. What the article is supposed to mean is that there is much better quality steel available today. This was not the case in 1909. Additionally, Titanic's builders were paid on a fee plus materials basis. They were given a set fee to construct the ship, plus the cost of all materials used. There was no incentive to use anything but the best steel they could get their hands on. The shipyard had an excellent reputation and would not risk tainting it by using bad steel, which could easily be noticed on inspection anyway. Titanic and her 2 sister ships Olympic and Britannic were also surprisingly maneuverable for their size, much more so than was expected. Some will tell you that Titanic's rudder was too small, but this simply isn't true. In fact, Olympic's wartime captain marveled at her maneuverability, and was even able to throw her into a sudden turn, ramming and sinking a German U-boat. Olympic was the only merchant vessel throughout the First World War recorded to have sunk an enemy vessel. While it's true that the lookout's binoculars were misplaced, or rather, locked away in a cabinet that no one on board had the key to open, this made no difference to Titanic's fate. The images of sea captains and pirates scanning the horizon through telescopes, while common in films, has virtually no stead in reality. Binoculars and telescopes narrow your field of vision down to a fine point, making it harder to spot anything. Lookouts on real ships will use their eyes alone to search for objects of interest, and once they've been spotted, will use a set of binoculars to further inspect it. Titanic's lookouts would not have been using their binoculars to search for iceberg even if they'd had them. Third class passengers were never trapped below decks. The big metal gates you might remember from the film never even existed. The only time passengers were kept below decks was near the beginning of the disaster, when the officers needed time to prepare the lifeboats. First and second class passengers were allowed on deck, but as there were so many more third class passengers, the crowd was asked to stay below for a short while, until the officers were ready to start loading lifeboats. No one was ever locked up. In fact, a higher percentage of third class males survived the sinking than second class males. Titanic was the largest ship in the world, but not by much. Her older sister Olympic was identical in almost every way. A few changes to Titanic's layout, including the covering up of some promenade decks, making them count as interior space, made her technically larger, but both ships were exactly the same length, breadth and height. Olympic had a GRT, gross registered tonnage, of 45,324 gross registered tons. Titanic's GRT was some 1,000 tons greater. After the disaster, Olympic received a refit, after which her GRT was up to about 30 more than Titanic's had been. But Titanic's younger sister, Britannic, which was launched after the disaster and had been modified during construction as a result of it, was about 2 feet wider than her sisters and had a GRT more than 2,000 tons greater than Titanic's. White Star Line's owner, Bruce Ismay, likely had nothing to do with the incident. Another myth popularized by the film is that Ismay had convinced Captain Smith to sail faster and try to get to New York in record time. He's also portrayed as a bumbling idiot, and sneaks onto a lifeboat when the officers aren't looking. While we'll never know whether or not Ismay really did discuss Titanic's schedule with Smith, it's incredibly unlikely. Smith was looking to retire after commanding Titanic, had an extremely good reputation, and was a much-loved public figure. Passengers scrambled to sail on a ship under his command. He is unlikely to have been swayed to make rash decisions based on Ismay's need for Titanic to make headlines. Ismay himself played an active role during the sinking, helping passengers into lifeboats and doing what he could where possible. One officer recalled telling him to get out of the way as he was making a nuisance of himself by getting involved, but testified that he was trying to help. Ismay stepped into an empty spot on one of the last boats to leave the ship, just as it was preparing to lower. He didn't take anyone else's space. Unfortunately, the media needed a scapegoat, and he was the highest ranking official to survive the disaster. He adopted a secluded lifestyle after the disaster, funding several naval charities but otherwise staying out of the public eye. Higher watertight compartments or compartments sealed at the top would not have saved the ship. Most people could tell you that Titanic sunk because the weight of the water in the foremost watertight compartments pulled the bow down, allowing the water to spill over the top into more compartments, and so on throughout the ship. But had Titanic's watertight bulkhead walls run all the way to the top deck, she might actually have sunk faster. With so much water contained in the front third of the vessel, she would have begun to tilt forwards much earlier, and possibly have broken in two sooner than she did. Sealing the tops of the bulkheads to prevent water from spilling over is actually illegal, and still is today. The International Solace, Safety of Life at Sea, regulations state that no civil, non-military, vessel can have any obstruction above watertight compartments that could impede a passenger's escape. The bottom line is that Titanic was damaged beyond her specifications, and was doomed from the moment she hit the iceberg. Full astern. There's a belief, popularized by the film, that Titanic's engines were thrown full astern on sighting the iceberg, and that this may have hindered her ability to turn away from it. This rumor started because of evidence given by the fourth officer, who wasn't even on the bridge at the time of the collision. The only survivor who was present was the quartermaster, but from his position in the wheelhouse he couldn't see the command sent to the engine room on the bridge telegraphs. Survivors from the engine room and the boiler rooms attested that the command was stop rather than astern. Whoever you choose to believe, when you think about the timescale it really makes very little difference. There was less than 40 seconds between the iceberg sighting and the collision, and in that time, the lookouts had to ring the bell, pick up the phone, Wait for 6th Officer Moody to enter the wheelhouse and answer it, and alert him to the iceberg. Then, Moody relayed that order to the most senior officer on the bridge, 1st Officer Murdoch. Murdoch ordered the turn to port, then crossed to the telegraph to send the order to stop. Try acting that out in real time, and work out how long the engineers had to act on the stop order. Not long enough. There's a really good article explaining exactly what went on in the engine rooms. Here, this goes into a lot more detail than I can, and comes to the same conclusions. Long story short, there wasn't even enough time to stop the engines, let alone put them in reverse. Slowing down or keeping full ahead would have had no difference, as the turning circle stays the same. Leaving the starboard engine running may have turned Titanic's bow away from the iceberg, but it would have made it more difficult to keep the stern away. CPR is used to restart hearts and is quite successful. CPR is hugely unsuccessful and isn't used to restart hearts. It's used to keep circulation going until medication to restart the heart can be administered. A defibrillator is used to restart hearts. Nope again. It's used to stop hearts that are beating incorrectly in the hope that when they restart they'll be beating all nice and proper. It is a complete falsehood that if a penguin does not find love, it waddles off to die alone. I was horrified when I first saw this, and since I couldn't find anything else on the internet about it, I reached out to Dr. Dees Bosma at the University of Washington and asked her about this claim. She told me that she has 33 years of data and has observed pairings that have stayed together for as long as 16 years. She also told me that penguins can get divorced when not successful at mating, and that they will most likely will divorce if not hatched. There is also a major gender skew of more males than females. If a male wants a mate, he has to have a nest set up. Furthermore, females don't come ashore unless they are going to mate, so some females will skip breeding season if they are not in a mating mood. For example, a female she studied had skipped pairing with her male for a year. The male looked for another mate, didn't find one, and then the next year she was back with him. They do have emotions and they do vary in aggressiveness over a lifetime. Furthermore, because there are many more males than females, a lot of males have never gotten mates. One of the penguins they've studied, Turbo, a Magellan penguin, has not had a mate in 14 years and he keeps on trying. So penguins do not, in fact, waddle off to die if they do not find a mate. The best way to escape a bear is to run downhill. You may get faster running downhill. Guess who else does too? Tic Tacs are sugar free. While listed as sugar free, this is a marketing trick taking advantage of a loophole due to their small size. To be listed as sugar free, a product must contain no more than 0.5 grams of sugar per serving. Tic Tacs are approximately 98% sugar, but the serving size is 1 mint, with an average size only 0.49 grams. Edit. RIP my inbox. St. Patrick isn't Irish. He's Welsh. That Pearl Harbor was the only attack on US soil during World War II. In fact, the Japanese bombed Dutch Harbor and invaded the Aleutian Islands. There were also U-boat attacks on the west coast and German spies who landed via U-boat on the east coast. None of these were particularly consequential in the grand scheme of things though, so they were forgotten. You see this in the media a lot, that a heart attack is the same as cardiac arrest. It's not. In order for a body to function normally, blood needs to flow to the cells to drop off oxygen and nutrients and take away waste products. If that process stops, the cells begin to starve, fill up with waste and die. The blood travels through arteries in the heart just like most other places in the body. A heart attack is when one or more of those arteries are blocked and the heart tissue starts to die from starvation. If enough cells die, the entire organ dies. A cardiac arrest is when the entire heart fails to pump normally, resulting in that blood flow stopping throughout the entire body, not just the heart. There are several causes of cardiac arrest, one of them being a major heart attack that kills enough of the heart muscle. But you can have a cardiac arrest from having a multitude of medical problems. From a burst blood vessel in your brain to a blocked blood vessel in your lungs and even losing enough blood or having a huge systemic infection. These are the people who need CPR. Edited for oversimplification and clarity. Full stop. If you're undercover and a cop, you have to tell me the structure of a wolf pack. Contrary to what most people think, there is no alpha, beta, ect in the pack. Rather, the pack is made up of a family with the mother and father leading, followed by their cubs and later the families of their cubs. After a while the cubs break off from the pack to find their mates and will remain on their own. That BuzzFeed comes up with these lists on their own. I see you, BuzzFeed. The food pyramid. It was lobbied into what we grew up on by the food industry, having plenty of grain. I mean, come on, grain is not more necessary than vegetables and fruit. That you eat 8 spiders in your sleep, you actually eat them mostly in your processed food, as the FDA allows a limit on things like peanut butter and tomato soup. That we only use 10% of our brain, and if we could use 100% we'd all be super geniuses or something. The whole tongue map thing. You don't have parts of the tongue that only react to a specific taste. That life expectancy several hundred years ago was only 35 or so. The average age was lower due to incredibly high infant mortality rates. However, if you could survive infancy childhood, you'd likely live well into your late 50s or 60s. That women are paid 77% as much as men for the same job. It's a myth that the Great Wall of China is the only man-made object visible from space. It may be long, but it is not very wide, so there would be no way you could see it from over 100 miles above the Earth without some sort of magnification such as a telescope. There are man-made objects that can be seen from space, such as some open-cast mining pits, and also the greenhouse in southern Spain can be seen, but with viewing from space it depends on perfect conditions with clear skies and no clouds. Eating carrots doesn't actually improve your night vision. This was a disinformation campaign carried out by the British in World War II to keep the Germans from discovering that they invented radar. Pretty funny obvious once you stop and think about it. Edit. It was because of the invention of Doppler radar actually helped distinguish distance and speed so they could intercept German bombers more effectively. Thanks to you, sir. While Donald Trump is the 45th president of the United States, he will be only the 44th person, also the 44th male also, to actually hold the job. Recall that President Grover Cleveland served 2 non-consecutive terms. He won election in 1884, lost in 1888, and won again in 1892 also, so he is considered both the 22nd and 24th president. While dining, the ancient Romans did not ritualistically eat so much that they had to interrupt eating to go vomit. An entranceway to a stadium of that time was called a vomitorium and had nothing to do with dining. I have seen this fact in at least 2 children's history books, and I have no idea how or why some historian came up with this weird claim. Speaking of eating, those fat Buddha statues and depictions you see in some Asian restaurants are not the historical Buddha, who founded Buddhism and was not obese. They are Budai, a 10th century Chinese folk hero, who eventually became a Buddha himself. Israel Bessel, not Paul Revere, was the most important writer who let the revolutionaries know the English were coming. George Washington never cut down his parents' cherry tree, nor did he ever utter the words "I cannot tell a lie," though the long rifles were useful in fighting the British during the Revolutionary War. Muskets made up the bulk of the American firearms. Blood isn't blue in your veins. It's definitely still red, just darker. Breakfast is the most important meal of the day. This originated as an ad campaign to sell breakfast cereal. The Pilgrims are very unlikely to have actually landed at Plymouth Rock. The scene from Fresh Prince where Will starts crying about his father is commonly said to be an improvised scene, but Will actually had a very good relationship with his father growing up. When Emma Freeze asks what killed the dinosaurs, and then proceeds to say the Ice Age. Worst part of that movie. Microwaves and cell phones cause cancer from radio waves. The visible light spectrum has more energy than any of the waves coming from your microwave or cell phone. Both microwaves and cell phones do not emit ionizing radiation. However, humans do. D. I got downvoted last time I posted this answer to this question, but it still doesn't make it true. There is gravity in space. This time I will also throw in that Earth's shadow is not responsible for moon phases. If you flatline a defibrillator won't do a damn thing. Doesn't matter how high you shout clear. It's designed to stop a heart, not start it. It stops your heart and then your built-in pacemaker takes over. Of course I am no medical person, so correct me if I am wrong. The body's natural state is perfect health. All ailments have an unnatural cause. For example, lemmings jumping off a cliff, glass being liquid, pizza invented in New York. The mantis shrimp can't see a million zillion colors. Earlier researchers made an assumption that their cones worked in the same way as our three do, color opponency. The oatmeal and a few others didn't know how to differentiate assumption from fact and popularized this idea of a hyper-aware shrimp. Extensive studies since then have disproved their color discrimination magic because, surprise, their retina is built differently. I think their honor punchman strength is still valid though. There are no hot females nearby dying to meet you. Putting your elbows on the dinner table is rude because of copper poisoning. Back in the day, copper miners would come home for lunch, still dressed in their coveralls. The residue from the copper ore would transfer to the table, then to the implements they ate with, and people would eventually die from copper poisoning. Like many aspects of etiquette, it was deemed rude instead of telling people it was killing them. It's a great fact because it's believable, and I invented it. Schizophrenia is not the disorder where you exhibit behavior of multiple personalities. That is dissociative identity disorder. Schizophrenia is a very complex disorder characterized mainly by delusions, hallucinations, and disorganized Owens speech. Wiki has a good enough summary. There were two that used to get circulated in chain emails back in the day. I haven't seen it in a while, so maybe it's gone. But a pregnant goldfish isn't called a twit. For one, goldfish don't get pregnant, they lay eggs. Secondly, there isn't a record before 1990 or so of anyone saying this. Second, a duck's quack does indeed echo. I suspect it was also just made up at some point, but there isn't anything special about a duck that makes it break the laws of physics. Lots about food. Bread isn't very good for you. Fat isn't all that bad for you. Eggs aren't bad for you. Artificial sweeteners aren't unhealthy, although possibly addictive. Withholding nuts from infants may actually cause nut allergies instead of preventing them, as was previously believed. Edit. Nut allergies. Not but allergies. Edit 2. I didn't say bread was bad for you, people. I said it isn't very good for you. Doesn't add a lot to your diet besides carbs. It gets posted almost daily here on Reddit, but Hugo Boss didn't design any uniforms for Nazi Germany. The modern Hugo Boss company actually had to hire 2 historians to take a look because it's such a popular myth. Even Wikipedia incorrectly said he was Hitler's personal designer for some time. Neither historian found any contemporary evidence supporting the claim, though Hugo Boss did own a clothing company that won several contracts to manufacture German Nazi uniforms. But the designs had already been made by the Nazis' German army. Many people believe that eating carbs makes you fat. Carbs don't make you fat. Overeating food does. The fact you can get a cold from being cold. If your palm is bigger than your face, it means you have cancer. This is not true. In fact, it is actually a ruse to trick you into putting your hand up to your face, only to have Steve hit your hand into your own face in front of the whole class, including Jessica, who you've had a crush on since the 4th grade. The pain from hitting yourself in the face will fade, but the sting of shame and embarrassment will linger for life. Glass is a slow-moving liquid, like WTF. Sharks aren't actually as dangerous as people make them out to be. I mean, I wouldn't recommend you hug one. Nor would I recommend you suddenly act casual around them like they are buds. But it won't come and eat you just because you are there. They have a pretty fine diet, and only really eat anything outside of their diet if they are starving, which is rare. The only time they will attack outside of feeding is when they feel you are a threat, or when provoked, and are usually fended off pretty easily by hitting them on the snout eyes. Sugar makes kids hyper. It does not. That it's illegal to yell fire in a crowded movie theater. This concept comes from Schenck v. United States. However, that case was overturned. More than the court overturned the Schenck decision that had introduced shouting fire in a crowded theater. No longer was clear and present danger a sufficient standard for criminalizing speech. To break the law, speech now had to incite imminent lawless action. Steel beams can't melt fire. Pretty late to the party, but here goes. Most people believe that Gutenberg invented the first printing press, but this is wrong. He invented the movable letters, which made higher volume printing feasible. The first printed books were probably made by the Chinese, which used woodcuts to reproduce pamphlets. Bonus fact, the guy was not even called Gutenberg but Johannes Gensfleisch Zerladen zum Gutenberg. It just runs off the tongue easier this way. Silences make gun silent. That Mama Cass, from the band The Mamas and the Papas, cause of death was choking on a ham sandwich. She actually died of a heart attack. There was a half-eaten sandwich in her hotel room, which was the source of the rumor that you should drink 8 glasses of water a day. Full stop. Nelson Mandela died in 1980s. That a soul has weight, specifically 21 grams. The study that this is based on only tested 6 people. 1 out of the 6 lost weight at death, and only at death. The rest of the patients either had multiple fluctuations, not just at death, or had no change at all. The researcher even said that more studies would need to be done. Yet for some reason many people now think that a soul weighs 21 grams. Hitler snubbed Jesse Owens, an African-American athlete, at the 1936 Berlin Olympics by refusing to shake his hand. Hitler wanted to only congratulate German winners. However, he didn't shake any athlete's hand because the head of the International Olympic Committee told him he must congratulate all gold medalists or none at all. Jesse Owens was snubbed by the President of the United States after the Olympics, in which 18 African-American athletes competed with record-breaking success. Only white athletes were invited to meet President Franklin Delano Roosevelt at the White House. It was an election year, and FDR did not want to be perceived as being soft on the Negro issue. Source: the often cited claim that there are more black men in prison than college. Bill Cosby said it during his 2004 pound cake speech, and it went viral among an uncannily diverse group ranging from white supremacists to mainstream civil rights activists, even ending up in a 2007 Barack Obama stump speech. But it has been provably false since at least 2002, and was almost certainly never true to begin with. That women talk per day on average more than men. It's a common misconception that many of those fact pages like to post. Somehow this is STH that the majority of people have accepted as true. Circumcision is better for personal hygiene.